Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Policy Beats. We are joined here today with Dr. Ilhan Niaz. He's a professor of history at the Quaid-e-Azam University and is most recently the author of New World Empires, Cultures of Power and Governance in the Americas. Thank you so much, sir, for taking out the time to join us for this podcast.
Hey, thank you for inviting me. Great to be here.
सर आपके काफ़ी सारे स्टूडेंट्स हैं, आपकी बुक्स पढ़ते रहते हैं हम लोग और देयर इज़ अ लॉट टू लर्न फ्रॉम यू एंड ऑफ कोर्स जो अभी हमने एक छोटी सी डिस्क्रिप्शन दी इज़ नॉट इनफ टू कवर the kind of work that you have been doing. Before we jump on to the subject itself, I would like to know why history? Why was this the particular profession that you came to choose, teaching and history in particular?
History's always been my favorite subject. And when I was 13, I read this book by J.M. Roberts called History of the World.
Okay.
And it just struck me as really fascinating. And I kept on reading more and more because the good thing about history is it's one of those subjects that you can learn more about without any technical skill. You just read more about it. And I ended up doing what I enjoy the most for a living. So I guess that's very fortunate as well.
That's a win-win situation.
Yes, yes.
थैंक यू सो मच सर फॉर शेयरिंग दैट पार्ट बिकॉज ज़्यादातर मैं अपने बाकी गेस्ट से भी अक्सर पूछती हूँ कि हमारे यहाँ बहुत ही फोकस्ड होती थी द स्ट्रीम्स ऑफ प्रोफेशन गाइडेड बाय द एल्डर्स हु वुड थिंक कि इसमें सस्टेनेबिलिटी है, इसमें नहीं है. तो एवरी टाइम आई कम अक्रॉस समवन हु टीचेस एंड स्पेशली व्हेन इट कम्स टू हिस्ट्री, इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस और उसका जो अपटेक है इन आवर सोसाइटी आहिस्ता आहिस्ता हुआ. जर्नलिज्म तो एक्सेप्ट हो गया था, बट ये कुछ ऐसे सब्जेक्ट्स होते हैं जिसमें अभी भी लोग बहुत इंस्पायर होते हैं, दे वांट टू मूव फॉरवर्ड एंड पीपल लाइक योरसेल्फ देन become the torch bearers for others to study and move in that direction. सर बात करते हैं अब आई थिंक पाकिस्तान इंडिया पार्टीशन हैपेंड, ऑल दैट, इंडिपेंडेंस हुई और अब दो कंट्रीज़ आर प्रेजेंट. मुख्तलिफ इंसिडेंट्स रहे, जंगें रहीं, डिप्लोमेसी भी रही. बट अगर हम थोड़ा पीछे जाएं, देखें द लॉन्ग पार्टीशन, जो लेगेसी, लीडरशिप और वो आर्किटेक्चर ऑफ सेपरेशन क्या था. तो जो आई वुड लाइक टू आस्क यू सर कि जो पॉलिटिकल स्ट्रक्चर्स थे एट द टाइम ऑफ द ब्रिटिश राज, पर्टिकुलरली द सिस्टम्स जहाँ पे कम्युनल रिप्रेजेंटेशन हम देखते हैं, was that the only reason that set the stage for partition, and also how the subcontinent has been post-partition?
Okay, so the first thing is that during the post-1857 period, the British began introducing different forms of elected local government at the municipal level and then eventually at the regional level. And this led to a debate amongst Indians in which the question was raised about what is the nature of representation in South Asia. Muslim modernists like Sir Syed Ahmad Khan and later Muhammad Ali Jinnah, they argued that the nature of politics in South Asia is communal. And as a consequence, South Asian citizens or South Asian subjects will not relate to an electoral process as isolated individuals with interests against which they will vote or for which they will vote,
I see.
but as different larger identity groups.
Okay.
So because of this, the nature of representation in South Asia is fundamentally different from the nature of representation, let's say, in England or in France, where you have these individualized societies. As you extend the franchise, this identity structure becomes more difficult to overcome. So their reasoning was that because of this, if we want to have a stable democratic system in South Asia, you need to recognize this communal reality.
Okay.
And only then can you actually have a democratic system over here. The opposite argument was given by the leaders of the Indian National Congress. And although from time to time they came close to an agreement with this position expressed by the Muslim League and others, by 1928, in the Motilal Nehru report, they very firmly stated that there are no real minorities in India. The
Okay.
issue of minorities is purely a creature of the British imperial divide and rule strategy.
Okay.
And as a consequence, there is no need for any special safeguards or any representation on the basis of an assumed minority or a communal identity. This was in contrast to the Lucknow Pact of 1916, which was agreed to by the Muslim League and the Congress at a sort of coordinated session of the two. And in that, the two parties had essentially agreed on the principle of minority overrepresentation, which is to say, they had come to an understanding that because the nature of majoritarianism in South Asia is likely to be communal, minorities would need special protection regardless of where the minority was.
Okay.
So, in the Muslim majority areas, the non-Muslims should have more representation, and in the Hindu majority areas, the Muslims should have more representation. So that was a sort of architecture that was agreed to, in addition to other things, which they also agreed that, if let's say there is a law that anybody wants to pass, and that law specifically affects the religious life or the culture of a particular community, you need the majority of the representatives of that community to agree to the law, regardless of the overall majority that might exist in the parliament or in the provincial assemblies or any other such thing. In effect, giving cultural and religious minorities a veto over any attempt by a majority to override their cultural and religious life. So that was the sort of understanding represented by the Lucknow Pact. And the Lucknow Pact, in a way, represented a compromise between the Indian National Congress position and the Muslim League position. And what we see is that that compromise is effectively repudiated by the Indian National Congress in 1928. So then, after 1928, you see the Muslim League adopting a much harder line when it comes to the issue of communal representation. And eventually, that harder line manifests itself in the demand for the creation of sovereign and autonomous Muslim majority states, initially plural in South Asia, in the event of the British departure. And that resolution, the Lahore Resolution, is then basically dubbed the Pakistan Resolution by the critical Hindu-friendly press. And that name sticks. And we also generically refer to it as the Pakistan Resolution. So you see this happening in our context. And even after this, you see that there are attempts at compromise. So if you look at, let's say, the Cabinet Mission Plan, the All India Muslim League agrees to the plan. The Indian National Congress initially agrees, but then when Nehru takes over as the president of Congress, he repudiates many of its important positions and effectively withdraws from the plan. This then triggers a response from the Muslim League where they call for a direct action day, and that leads to the communal rioting in Calcutta. And that then becomes the trigger for similar escalation in other parts of South Asia as well, ultimately culminating in partition. So it's a very long and winding road in that sense.
Absolutely, and it has many dimensions to it, as anyone would delve deeper into it. But sir, also coming to the question that these colonial structures influenced the mindsets of post-partition leaders. to what degree do you see it still creating issues between Pakistan and India when it comes to developing the relations between the two states?
The interesting thing is that when the colonial hangover was strongest in the, let's say, first 20, 30 years of independence, India and Pakistan, in spite of the 1948 war in Kashmir or even the 1965 war, they had fairly normal bilateral relations. They even agreed to the Indus Waters Treaty to share the river system that existed. So, this indicates that that shared legacy might have actually helped deal with some of these things. But as we have gone further away from partition, what is interesting is that the relations between the two countries have experienced more turbulence rather than less turbulence. And today, we might well make the case that, whereas, let's say, 1940s or 50s or 60s, India and Pakistan were enemy states, today we might have reached the point where India and Pakistan are actually enemy societies, which is a very, very different sort of animosity than the first kind.
That's a very interesting point that you've made, sir, and I will come to that as well, because दोनों तरफ बातचीत होती है. एक तरफ हिंदुत्व माइंडसेट जब राइज करेगा तो जाहिर है उसकी रिटेलिएशन में भी फिर कुछ गुफ्तगू होगी, कोई नैरेटिव्स आएंगे. But going a little bit back on what you mentioned about the Muslims taking a hard line on the idea of a separate nation state. So, just for a primer, why did our leaders view sovereignty as the only viable path to dignity and modernity, and that too by the 1940s? What was the environment like? And how did this framing shape Pakistan's foundational worldview as it is today?
Okay, so the demand for greater sovereignty and eventually complete independence was understood as a necessary prerequisite for building a modernized Muslim society. So, when you look at the Muslim discourse, the Muslim League, which leads the independence movement, is actually a modernist party, and there are some traditionalists who are associated with it, but many of the traditionalists are actually quite happy aligning themselves with the Indian National Congress. And the reason for that is that they suspect that the leaders of the Muslim League want to create a modern state, a state that will, in effect, create a national state along modern lines. And Jinnah's own correspondence and speeches and statements more or less, confirm this, that he had a definitely non-traditionalist view on most questions that would affect the well-being of the Muslims after independence. So this demand was basically that until the Muslims regain sovereign power over as much of South Asia as possible, where they are in a majority, they will not be able to create the conditions that are necessary to build and modernize up to the level of contemporary civilization. So, in the thinking of the leaders of the Muslim League, especially Jinnah, the demand for Pakistan was actually a modernizing project in which the Muslim modernists would gain control of a state and then use that control to rapidly advance society to a certain level of industrial and socio-economic development. So that was the purpose, if you will, that lay behind their thinking. They were not really that interested in the nitty-gritty of religious law, that sort of stuff, and nor were they particularly qualified on these subjects. But they did understand that this is what we need to do.
So one of the things that we read in our discourse as well is the idea that the Muslim minority in India or the Muslims of India were threatened by the Hindu control, and we saw that when when the Congress won elections, uh, that brief period in which the Hindus got to rule, and the kind of things that happened against Muslims. So one question I guess I would ask is then, was the separate homeland then truly based on aspirations, or was it more so fueled by the fear?
Look, the thing to understand is that once you inject nationalism into an environment, as happened during British rule, then different forms of nationalism start developing and competing with each other. And in our context, the two big forms that emerge are the Indian composite nationalism that is espoused by the Indian National Congress and the Muslim nationalism that is espoused by the Muslim League. So there are other nationalisms as well. So I mean, you can look at different ethnic or regional nationalisms or senses of identity that could have become nationalism during this period too. But these two become the dominant ones. So in that context, this insecurity is actually there on both sides. So the desire to assert your majoritarianism on the side of the Congress is a manifestation of the fact that for nearly 900 years to 1,000 years, in the perception of the educated intelligentsia of the Hindus, they were under the heel of Muslim conquerors. And you actually see this insecurity very cleverly targeted by the Muslim League in its discourse as well. When the Muslim League makes the point that, the British took the rule of South Asia from the Muslims by right of conquest.
Okay.
And when they leave South Asia, our demand is that you should restore the sovereignty of the Muslims over those territories where they are in a majority. Because, you conquered us, so, we can respect that. You beat us on the battlefield. That's, we should have beaten you, but that didn't happen. Tough luck. We're not going to be sore losers about it. But now that you're leaving, it is not acceptable to, in a sense, imprison us in a constitutional political system where a Hindu majority can take out its 1,000 years of real or imagined insults and complexes on the Muslims. So, for as many of the Muslims as possible, have a separate state. Within this, there is one important point. When the Muslim League talked about the partition, they talked about the partition of the British Empire in India.
Okay.
And their demand was that the entire province where Muslims were in majorities should go to Pakistan. That meant the whole of the Punjab and the whole of Bengal. However, once the Cabinet Mission Plan failed, the British acceded to the Congress demand basically to communally partition Bengal and Punjab. And they did so in such an incompetent manner, especially in the Punjab, that it then led to massacres and all sorts of upheaval. So this is also something which is ironic in a sense, that if, let's say, the territorial demand of the Muslim League had been accepted, then Pakistan would have come into existence with a roughly 30 to 35% non-Muslim minority.
Absolutely.
But the strange thing over here was that the non-Muslims and the Congress were not prepared to live in a Muslim majority state.
Similar fears on both ends.
And by extension, they wanted the Muslims to live in a Hindu majority state. So you have this hiatus, if you will, in their logic that if for you rule through democratic means by a Muslim majority is not acceptable,
then how can you?
then why should rule by a non-Muslim majority be acceptable for the Muslims? That you can have one or you can have the other. You can't say that, well, if we're in a majority, it's all right, everyone should live under our rule. But if you're in a majority, sorry, we're going to partition your territory and all the non-Muslims are going to leave your country and we're going to give you a moth-eaten, truncated version of what you had originally demanded.
Sir, the British accession towards the needs of the Congress or the plea of the Congress, was it intentional?
Yes, it was.
But to what benefit, one wonders?
Essentially, the British regarded India as the successor state, and they regarded Pakistan as a loose collection of unstable seceding territories that might at any time collapse and have to return to the Indian fold. And this was a view shared by many of the Indian leaders at the time of independence as well.
They still speak of it as a buffer zone.
Ji. So in that sense, the British did not take their obligations to the soon-to-be Pakistan side as seriously as they did to the Indian side. There was also the minor issue of Mountbatten's extremely large ego, which Nehru had very cleverly massaged by inviting him to continue as Governor General of independent India. And Jinnah had very rudely rebuffed, in his view, by essentially saying that Jinnah was going to be the Governor General of the newly created Pakistan. So there was that animus as well, that, I've been personally slighted by the Muslim League. So that also, already the tilt was very much in India's favor, but then whatever little hope there might have been for some even-handed treatment disappeared with that.
Sir, if I may digress here a little bit, when we study these things, and oftentimes we come across the concepts of civilizational states, one wonders if having a Muslim country, the Islamic civilization, the revival of that kind of a concept, was something that the Britishers felt threatened by. Just a conjecture.
It wasn't a question of being threatened. Very specifically and historically, between about 1500 and 1750, the Ottoman Empire was precisely one of the great powers.
Absolutely.
And a state that had strategic autonomy from the West and periodically threatened the West as well. So it was very clear to the leaders of European countries, including England and France and Russia, that we cannot afford that type of unified structure in this region, because the resources, the manpower, the potential of this region is such that if it were to achieve a reasonable degree of internal peace and stability and unity, it would very quickly become a threat to the West. So there was no win-win for the West and as they saw it, the Eastern question.
Absolutely.
And therefore, the policy of the West in that part of the world has been to advance fragmentation and chaos and effectively keep that region on the defensive to prevent this type of outcome from materializing. So it was not simply, a fear that existed at the realm of imagination. It was a fear that was very physically manifested in the form of nearly 300 years of Ottoman success at dealing with Western powers.
And this is also essentially the time when we saw the downfall of the empire itself, the Ottoman Empire, the Khilafat movement and the Muslim support to that movement, just making these linkages as we speak. But moving on to India and Pakistan again, and I'm very much interested to further the discourse on Islamic civilization versus the West some other time. Um, Coming to the question that how do India and Pakistan's governance structures or governance cultures, as you may be interested to answer that, continue to sort of put us at odds with each other. You mentioned that now these are enemy societies instead of enemy states.
I think the big change that has come is with the rise of Hindu nationalism in India. And the reason for this is that uh, while the Congress was a majoritarian party, the fact is that its idea of an Indian state uh, did encourage or allow for minorities to retain their identity and have political participation within the framework of a composite nation. So, with the mainstream Indian nationalism slowly being eroded by Hindu nationalism, you have a change in this thinking. So, as far as the Hindu nationalists are concerned, if we, let's say, talk about the need to decolonize India, as far as they are concerned, the real decolonization of India involves the elimination of all external accretions. And the Muslim culture and the Muslim presence is the most substantial alien accretion. So that has to be neutralized.
That is their strategic thinking.
So that is their long-term goal. And related to this, what has also happened is that attacking Pakistan, both verbally and also militarily, has become a very important source of domestic popularity.
Absolutely.
For the BJP government. So this is something that Modi especially has honed, and he reaped success from it in 2016 and 2019.
And now again.
He tried to do so again now, but this time he appears to have not been as successful as he was in 2019.
Absolutely.
So this might actually lead him to make another attempt sooner rather than later to recapture what he feels he has lost. So we can't really predict that. But what this change basically means is that it's a lot harder to create the political space you need to find a means towards peaceful coexistence or settlement of disputes. And the level of, now I would say, rage on the Indian side is such that the Indian government is making decisions like, let's say, holding the Indus Waters Treaty in abeyance, even though the basic facts of geography tell us that India is technically not the upper riparian. It is the mid riparian in relation to the Indus, and it is the lower riparian in relation to the Brahmaputra. So it actually makes no sense for the Indians to weaken the rights of the lower riparian because they are also in the same boat as Pakistan. But doing things like this is a way of compensating in the eyes of the public, and it's a way of garnering that popularity that Modi craves. So you have this very strange situation now where it seems that India's policy towards Pakistan, at least, is driven very heavily by a domestic political calculus. And that makes it very difficult then for any serious negotiations or even steps towards normalization to be taken.
Sir, on our end, do you believe that peace can even be imagined under these circumstances when it comes to India?
Well, I mean, you can imagine anything. So But in order to get from where we are to such an outcome, you would require a lot of concessions, basically, from India. And these concessions are, in a way, self-incurred, because walking away from the Indus Waters Treaty, going back to it, will now exact a very heavy price for Modi and maybe even for any successor government that comes. So you really do have this entrenchment of differences. So yes, I mean, Pakistan can continue to, let's say, talk about, let's have a dialogue, let's meet, maybe have some sort of unofficial secret back channel ongoing between the two countries to try and at least manage things. But it's very hard to imagine a situation now where the two countries would move towards a comprehensive settlement, like they were doing, for example, during the time of Musharraf and Vajpayee, and then Musharraf and Manmohan Singh.
So now moving towards the broader canvas, with the global power shifting and alliances somewhat hardening or even becoming more flexible, what role does the India-Pakistan rivalry play in shaping the broader strategic landscape in South Asia and the Indian Ocean region?
I think the 4-day conflict has exposed a lot of problems with the narrative arc of a rising India.
Absolutely.
Of an India that is poised to become a great power, graduate from the ranks of the middle powers, and have a rough parity with China as its approximate equal. The 4-day conflict has reinforced India-Pakistan military parity. It has rehyphenated the two. It has demonstrated the competitiveness of Chinese military kits against Russian and European kits. It has shown that in spite of a huge amount of support from Western powers, in spite of basically having the access to whatever arms it wants to, India has not been able to develop the type of advantage over Pakistan where the numbers in terms of military spending and arms acquisition might lead one to think it should. So from India's perspective, I think Operation Sindoor was to be a superiority demonstration exercise where they would go in and basically show the world that we can treat Pakistan the way, let's say, the Israelis treat the Arabs, that there's really nothing they can do about it and we can hit them whenever we feel like.
They did not expect a Markai-Haq.
They did not expect the reverses that they suffered. And when they suffered those reverses, that caused their hard power stock to plummet in most of the world's capitals. So this is something which India now has to grapple with, that how does it reclaim that particular space for itself? And this in turn means that India has a very powerful geopolitical incentive to try and have a rematch with Pakistan sooner than later. But without the capacity to prevail easily, such a rematch could easily get out of hand. So, so you're in a very, very dangerous situation where a crisis could erupt and you would be back to the kind of situation we were in May. And this is also something that has alarmed foreign powers. So foreign powers, of course, don't care about the Kashmir dispute. They don't even really care about the Indus Waters Treaty. What they do care about is the risk of a nuclear war in South Asia. And again, the reason why they care about that is because a nuclear war between India and Pakistan would, as per the the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, uh, trigger a mild nuclear winter that would cause a famine that would kill between 1 and 2 billion people outside of South Asia, triggering essentially the collapse of human civilization as we know it. So that is the problem for them. And even Trump has been mentioning this point very frequently. I think he's made something like 24 statements since the conflict ended. And in it, he has repeatedly referred to the nuclear risk and the threat that that poses to everybody else. So this is also something which does not bode well for India's reputation as a stable, responsible nuclear power. It means that India is not willing to accept the old rules of nuclear deterrence and is trying to write its own rules. But those rules seem to be more a recipe for repeated risk of escalation rather than any kind of stability, which is what deterrence aimed to create. So there are a lot of problems on that front.
Absolutely. And I think we did see the kind of concern the international community showed. So also an interesting point to note is that normally Pakistan would not get its space despite being on the right on certain matters. But this time the community responded very differently. International community responded very differently to India's reason to attack Pakistan because we saw that India even backed out of the statement, the SCO statement, asking why Pakistan was not condemned for the alleged attack in Pahalgam. And I think things have so far shifted in Pakistan's favor, if I may say. Not sure for how long, because the Indian digital landscape, they are pretty good at making these influence ops, and so far they maintained that kind of hegemony when it came to narratives on Twitter, Telegram, etc., digital platforms. And despite us constantly debunking them, providing dossiers, things would not move in that direction. But we saw differently within this conflict. So, to say that, I mean, of course, as both states now embrace these new tools of influence, from literally digital propaganda to defense partnerships. How do you see this as a microcosm of what's going on across the globe? We also recently saw the Iran-Israel war. What's going on in Ukraine has been going on for a time. What's happening in Gaza, and now this 4-day conflict.
I think with reference to India specifically, the Indians have helped the Russians bust sanctions, and they have done so on a pretty large scale. And this is something which the Western powers have, till very recently, been willing to turn a blind eye to because of their overall need or perceived need for India as a kind of a balancer vis-a-vis China. The other thing related to this is that India has, notwithstanding what India and Pakistan do to each other, India has attempted, and in one case at least succeeded, to murder dissidents on North American soil.
Absolutely.
So what that will mean is that, again, basically the United States or Canada or other countries, they don't really care if India and Pakistan stir up trouble in each other's backyards, but they would care if they try to do something like this on their soil. So when you look at Pakistan's cooperation with the American counterterrorism agenda in Afghanistan, and you combine it with India's attempts to carry out assassinations in the United States,
exactly,
you, I think, have a very different scenario emerging, then the typical story about Pakistan being the big bad perpetrator of terrorism and India being the innocent victim of terrorism. The other thing over here is that the Indians are increasingly torn between their desire to be on the American side or perceived to be an integral part of the Western alliance architecture and their attempts to have strategic autonomy by also being members of BRICS or the SCO and asserting their own relationship, independent of what any Western powers think, with countries like Russia or with Iran. So now that game is becoming a little harder to play for the Indians. And I think that they have been caught wrong-footed by the swiftness with which the Trump administration has essentially moved to try and contain BRICS, try and raise the cost of being full member of what they perceive to be anti-US or anti-dollar arrangements. And that patience with India has run out or is running low. The other thing is that this is a very obvious question which Western planners are doubtless asking themselves. And that is that if after 30 years of such lavish support, India can't handle Pakistan militarily, how is it going to handle the Chinese? You see, so just in terms of the utility of India to any anti-Chinese arrangement, leaving aside what the Indian intentions are or their attempts to play both sides or all sides, this is a very real problem. That what exactly is it that India can bring to the table by way of actual military and geopolitical pressure on the Chinese? And the answer to that appears to be very little to nothing at all. So, what use are the Indians in an attempt to contain the Chinese?
Absolutely.
So, that is a question which Western planners have to start asking themselves in terms of continuing to support India at a strategic level in the hope that it will create a viable distraction or diversion of Chinese strength in the long term. That does not seem to be happening.
India cannot afford that. The trade volume, the kind of entrenchment that the trade ties have with China. But I guess that's a different kind of equation to discuss then. But sir, very lastly, I would ask you, what is it that you see for South Asia in the emerging order?
I think that we are headed into a period of far greater instability. I think that Pakistan in particular may soon find itself, along with many other countries, in the middle of a full-blown Sino-US Cold War scenario. And a lot of countries who really don't want to have to pick a side might be forced to choose one or the other. I also think that Pakistan's domestic vulnerabilities put it in a difficult place in terms of competing successfully with the rest of the world, economically and socially. So, notwithstanding the fact that it has significant military power, it has generally neglected all the other elements that make the nation strong. So, you need to get to work on those as soon as possible. As far as the wider world is concerned, you have a war of attrition raging in Europe. You have a genocide raging in the Middle East. You just had a very serious Israel-Iran war. You nearly had a risk of nuclear escalation in South Asia. There are alarm bells that are being rung in East Asia
Absolutely.
about the prospects of a more imminent clash of arms. So, what we are seeing is a shift uh, in favor of the kind of geopolitical competition that characterized the 1930s or 1940s, where states are no longer afraid to redraw maps using force of arms, where states are no longer afraid about trying to even exterminate enemy populations if they feel like it, and where states are increasingly relying upon their military strength to simply degrade the capabilities of other states with whom they have political or ideological differences. So it's a very, very dangerous time that we are currently in.
Not too optimistic, are we?
Well, that's just it. History often doesn't give you much basis for optimism. And what history also teaches you is that optimism is often lethal because it is something that often causes leaderships to overestimate their own strength and underestimate the insecurity and the instability that is growing all around them.
Absolutely.
So, if you are an ordinary person, it's probably healthy to be an optimist. But if you are a foreign policy planner or in charge of national security, it's probably safer for everybody if you are a pessimist who generally overestimates the risks and underestimates your own ability to deal with those risks.
Thank you so much, sir. It was wonderful having you on board.
My pleasure.
And while I have many more questions to ask, I think this is where we're going to conclude our conversation. Once again, it was a pleasure to host you, and I would be seeing you all again on another episode of Policy Beats.